For the topic of social psychology, we're going to spend a bit more than the usual amount of class time on a single special topic. Specifically, we're going to focus on prejudice and discrimination, a very important topic in our country, in fact, globally. I have been presenting students with the WP list to examine for decades, asking them to consider the items on the list and whether they have observed or experienced those situations themselves. There's an enormous amount of psychological literature on prejudice and discrimination. It is a focus of research for many psychologists, and it is a topic that has real-world value. This focus on prejudice and discrimination in my general psych class began many years ago, in part because I had students of color who were coming to me and describing their often very negative experiences with discrimination on campus and off campus. At that time, there was also a great deal of turmoil in the department because students of color in our PhD programs and master's programs were complaining that they encountered racism in the department and on campus. And these individuals have now come to be viewed as heroes and heroines by a faculty that finally began to listen to them and began to work to make the social climate in our psychology department better for all of our students. These students of color described experiences such as being asked to describe the black view on some topic, as if everybody who is a person of color thinks exactly alike. These PhD and master's graduate students also suggested that the faculty avoided eye contact with them in hallways, didn't learn their names, graded them differently, and just basically created a social climate that felt hostile. So they just kept raising the issue with faculty in the department individually or in groups until finally people started listening to them. And the URI psychology department made a very strong effort to try to improve its social climate. For instance, forming a task force on multiculturalism where faculty and graduate students could meet. It was a uniquely run group because it was not a majority rule situation. It was one where every issue had to be talked about until everyone in the group reached consensus. And this was tough on the faculty in the department. I was part of this. I sometimes saw some of my colleagues crying. They felt as if they were being called racist, and that's not pleasant. But I think most of us came around to being able to see the student's perspective and trying to make a strong effort to be more aware of these issues. One thing that came out of those task force meetings was a multicultural mission statement for the URI psychology department. And in a slide or two, I'll provide a link to that, because you're going to be writing a paper that you need to read the mission statement in order to perform well. But I'll read the one part of this mission statement that I absolutely love, my favorite part, and that is that as psychology faculty at URI, we respect cultural, individual, and role differences due to age, gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, disability, language, and socioeconomic status. To me, that's amazing. It's also impossible to live up to because we are encultured to see other people certain ways, to make assumptions about other people, to behave certain ways. But the idea is that we need to be more self-aware, and we need to work toward building a department where every student feels comfortable and every student has a positive learning environment. That is our responsibility as faculty members and teachers. The topic of privilege has been expanded over the years to give rise to discussions regarding discrimination based on one's sexual orientation and one's geographical place of birth and one's disability status and so on, just as described in the multicultural mission statement for the department. Here we're focusing, for the most part, but not entirely, on the topic of racism. You are probably already aware that racism can be both overt and covert. If it's overt, that means it's obvious, it's out there, easily observable. An example of overt racism would be someone calling another person by the N-word, or someone being racially profiled, arrested, or even killed because there are stereotypical assumptions about criminality based on skin color in the society. In the broader context of privilege, it might mean someone's beaten up because of their sexual orientation, or, as we're seeing today, sometimes Asian individuals are being spat on or beaten up because there are fears about the COVID-19 virus. These are all overt or obvious forms of racism or discrimination. But there are also more subtle, more hidden, covert forms of racism. As you examine the WP list, you will be thinking about what it would be like to experience these forms of discrimination on nearly a daily basis. There are also more systemic or institutional forms of racism built into our institutions, including universities. Just as an illustration, I can describe what happened to a friend of mine who was a professor at this university. She was a black faculty member, and it was very hard on her career because she was asked to serve in numerous committees across campus. Maybe you're already aware that it's publish or perish in academia, that professors, faculty need to conduct research and write and publish in order to receive tenure and be promoted. If you're serving on numerous committees, then it's hard to have time to do that, and it can harm your career. Basically, it's not that people in my university were bad for asking a black faculty member to participate on committees. It's important in order to have representation for decision making, but it can be hard on a faculty member who's one of only a few black faculty on campus. And it's very difficult to say no when you're invited to serve on a committee, particularly when you're being asked by someone who is in a higher position than yourself. You'll be able to talk more about these issues and concepts in your recitation, but I want to point out one more thing, and that is that symbols can hurt people. And this has actually been big in the news lately, but I've been pointing this out in classes for many years. One particularly hurtful type of symbol is the swastika, which represents Nazi Germany. And several years ago in the URI dormitories, a student drew a swastika on someone else's dorm door. As I understand it, he meant it as a joke because the resident of that dormitory room was Jewish. But it's not really a joke, at least not a funny one. I never spoke to the individual whose dormitory door was treated this way, but I can speculate. And if anyone has lost family members in the Holocaust, having family members abducted and tormented and killed, then that one symbol becomes a very hurtful object. And if you see it, it makes you remember that sense of being threatened and the loss to your family. I would imagine that it could be perceived as a threat. And not only was this an unkind act, but the student who drew the swastika on the dormitory door actually got charged with a hate crime. I haven't heard what happened since then, but I don't want any of my students having damage to their careers because of one-time behavior that they probably didn't even understand the consequences or how it could affect the people around them.